And the Atma Nirbhar Bar, it's very difficult.
Atma Nirbhar. Atma Nirbhar.
Pardon? See, that is the problem. You see, you don't understand that we speak different languages. Either it can be in English or you can have it in regional languages so all of us can say it. சரி இனிமேல தமிழ்லே பேசுறேன் புரியுதான்னு சொல்லுங்க. அதுக்கு பர்மிஷன் கேட்கணும்ங்கறீங்களே. அதுதானே பிரச்சனை. It's very heartwarming to listen to your words, which gives us a lot of credibility, because there are people who still do not accept that there is climate change and it's a crisis. So I start by thanking you for your words. And so today, human beings have become richer, more powerful, and more advanced. The literacy rate is much higher than ever before. But today's youth have never ever
अन्य सदस्य आपस में चर्चा मत कीजिए सदन में प्लीज बैठिए.
This kind of uncertainty, climate anxiety, their minds are eclipsed with fear. They do not. When I was talking to a group of youngsters, one of the boys told me that they're not sure whether they'll reach the age of 50. It was very destabilizing to listen to a young person in his early 20s say that I do not know whether I will reach the age of 50. So we cannot wish climate change away. One of our youngest climate activists, Greta Thunberg, says our house is on fire and act like it is. We cannot call climate activists alarmists, or we cannot, push it away saying it's conspiracy theories. Our oceans are heating up, the rains are acidic, forests are burning, coasts are eroding, sea levels are rising, and people are displaced, and that is the truth. So we are bickering and politicking over caste, religion, and racial differences. While we are doing all this, we are losing the only habitat known to humankind. And this is an existential crisis, and nothing is more important than this. The IPCC assessment report that was released in August this year has stated that it is code red for humanity. And it is said that it's just not climate change, but a climate emergency.
Very true.
The 26th Conference of Parties for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was recently held 1 month ago in Glasgow. The 26th COP meeting is considered as the most significant meeting of the century because of the crisis in front of us. There were around 6 trillion trees on this earth before agricultural revolution, which started around 10,000 years ago. Today, it is less than half of what was there before agricultural revolution started. So losing our forests is not just losing places of calm and comfort. We are losing the diversity of life, human health, and the livelihood it provides, and the climate resilience it gives the earth. Global warming is simply increasing carbon emissions in the atmosphere more than what can be absorbed by the trees, plants, seas, and natural environments. David Attenborough recently mentioned that it finally comes down to a single number, the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. And we should all join our hands together to combat it. The IPCC report 2018 also warned us that the global warming will increase during the 21st century unless deep reductions in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse emissions occur in the coming decades. The Paris Climate Agreement of 2015 was about limiting global temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius, whereas the Glasgow Agreement has gone a step ahead and it's very ambitious and it set its goals to reducing it around 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is pre-industrial revolution levels. Our Prime Minister has announced 5 important commitments in the climate summit. They are: India will increase its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. India will fulfill 50% of its energy requirements with renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce its carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030. India will reduce carbon intensity of its economy by 45% by 2030. And India will achieve net zero by 2070. So, net zero is the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases produced and removed from the atmosphere. All 5 commitments by India are about mitigation aspects of climate change. The final commitment of achieving net zero by 2070 has received the most praise. The IPCC report 1.5 degrees Celsius is the first document that mentioned net zero emissions. The report explored and presented pathways for countries to limit the global average temperature increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius. One of the key insights from this report is that the world needs to achieve this by 2015 to limit its temperature. So I'd like to ask, what does it mean to achieve net zero emissions by 2070 for India? According to the study conducted by the Council for Energy, Environment and Water, India's total installed solar power capacity needs to increase to 5,630 gigawatts by 2070 to achieve this. The net zero which we have promised, which we made as a promise in the summit to the world. But the government, in its reply to a question in Lok Sabha on 2nd December 2021, has said that only 46.25 gigawatts of grid-connected solar power has been installed in this country. So how are you going to achieve your target? I mean, this is nothing compared to what we have promised the world. The usage of coal, especially for power generation, would need to peak by 2040 and drop by 99% between 2040 and 2060. Further, crude oil consumption also has to peak by 2050 and fall substantially by 90%. In the Paris Climate Convention, India committed to increase the share of non-fossil fuel resources to 40% of the power generation capacity and reduce the emissions intensity of the economy by 30 to 35% compared to the 2005 levels. To achieve our Paris pledge, we must have completed at least 175 gigawatt of renewable energy generation by 2022. But we've only achieved not even 2/3 of what we have to achieve. So how are you going to keep up the promise you've made to this world? To achieve its new goals, India will need to do much more in a holistic way. For instance, our country has a target of achieving 40 gigawatts of green energy from rooftop solar sectors by 2022. But we have not been able to achieve even 20% of that so far. In the transport sector, India has targeted around, its target is around 30% of the share of vehicles, electric vehicles, will be increased by 2030. But according to the Climate Action Tracker, to be compatible with the Paris Agreement, the share of EV sales needs to be between 95 to 100% by 2040. Our target is 30%, but it has to be nearly 85 to 100%. How are you going to bridge this gap? And the next major roadblock for India achieving net zero emissions in India is increased reliance on coal for power generation. More than 52% of India's energy needs are met by coal alone, and more than 60% are from fossil fuels. While in the past 7 years, the country has invested rupees 5.2 trillion in renewable energy. 5.2 trillion in renewable energy. But the investment in fossil fuel industry, it's come down only by 4%, but the investment is around 245 trillion. So, how are you going to keep the promise you made to the world?
Very good question.
Worse, the coal production is estimated to increase by 1 billion tons. And by 2024, from that to around 716 million tons in 2021. India is already home to the second largest coal-fired power plant pipeline in the world. According to the Central Electricity Authority, coal capacity is projected to increase from 202 gigawatt in 2021 to 266 gigawatts by 2930. The thermal power plants are not only a major source of carbon emissions, they also have other emissions like nitrous and sulfur oxide. India is the largest emitter of sulfur dioxide in the world. What are we doing? What are we going to do to reduce this? The government has initially had set a deadline for 2017 to install flue gas desulfurization units that will cut sulfur dioxides in our coal plants. But then we've moved the deadlines. We did not do anything to cut the emissions. But the easiest thing to do was to move the deadlines from 2017 to beyond that. The reason is costs. Because the private corporate companies, did not want to pay that much to install cutting down emissions, and nor did the government want to do it. But I'd like to ask, which is more important, human lives or these costs? It is very clear that the reliance on coal for energy in India will continue, and it will peak in 2040. But the government is not honoring, and only after that will it fall, and you will be able to reach your net zero by 2070. But you have not started honoring your commitments. You're just pushing deadlines. How will you achieve what you promised to do?
Correct.
So we can say, and everybody blames the developed nations, and it is true that all of us are paying the price for what the developed nations did. The developed nations today India wants to position itself as the voice of the developing nations and the third world countries. It is our duty to make sure they have made a commitment of $100 billion to combat climate change. What have we done to ensure that this commitment made by these nations are fulfilled? And the corporates, today what we eat, how we travel, how we live, everything has an impact on environment. And who makes profits out of it? It's the huge corporate companies. And these corporate companies do not let justice be done to people. Their lobbies will not allow the governments to make policy changes, and they do not allow justice to be done to the people. And we have examples in the Union Carbide plant. What happened 35 years after that? Still people are seeking justice, still people have not got what they have to be given rightly. The compensation has not been given to them, and there's no cleanup. Still, whatever was dumped there is still there, lying around. They haven't cleaned up. Same thing in Kodaikanal in Tamil Nadu. The Unilever, for 14 years, the mercury which has been dumped there has been poisoning the forests, the people who are working there, and the water, the river. Are they held accountable? No, they get away. So without getting justice for the common people, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep our promises to the world? So we talk about so many disasters. We talk about refugees, around the world. People who are affected because of politics, because of religion, because of race, because of so many reasons. But we forget to talk about climate refugees. And that is going to be the largest number of people in the future. According to statistics, an average of 26 million people around the world have been forcibly displaced by floods, windstorms, earthquakes, and droughts. And this number, by 2050, will be increasing to 2 million people who will be forced to flee their homes, the places where they live in, the places where they work, where their forefathers lived, where they hope their children will live. They will have to leave these places and move and run as refugees because of climate change. And sadly, the Refugee Convention in 1951, it did not talk about the climate refugees, and we did not care about them then. We did not even know much about it then. But then, it is the responsibility of countries like India to make sure that these people are included. Climate refugees are included, and there's a definition for climate refugees so that their plight can be addressed and the world can be more sympathetic towards them. Sir, and India is going to be affected. In India itself, close to 1.5 million are being displaced every year because of climate change and because of extremities which we face every year. And just not being displaced internally. Neighboring countries can be affected because of water levels rising in the sea, and if they are submerged, people are going to come to our country and we will be affected. So what is the plan? What is the policy? Do you have any clarity of idea? Do you have have you thought about it? How are you going to handle the people who are going to be internally displaced? Agriculture is going to be affected. People in the coastal areas are going to be affected. Fishing people are going to be affected. Their livelihoods are going to go. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to handle people who are coming from other nations into our country? Sir, we know this House has seen that, members must have seen what happened in many of the states in India. And recently in Tamil Nadu, there has been an excess of 75% rainfall in Tamil Nadu. And these extreme weather conditions are definitely they are caused by erratic rainfall patterns, and the impact of climate change cannot be ignored because they are overlapping. And cities and agricultural lands, everything is being affected. Cities are being flooded. Do we have any plan how we are going to deal with it in future? It is there. We have a problem. There's excessive rainfall. Chennai was flooded. My constituency, Thoothukudi, was flooded. We're struggling to drain the water out. But I think the union government has to have a clear plan about how we are going to deal with it, how, how future rainfalls, monsoons are going to be dealt with. Do you have any plans? Do you have any clarity about it? But sadly, Chennai is struggling with floods. Water doesn't have any way to go out to the sea. And in spite of all that, you want to expand the port. And you want to close the Ennur Creek and the Kosasthalayar River Basin because you want to expand the port. What happens to the city? What happens to the people there? Should we all drown? That's the only thing which will happen if the creek is closed.
What a shame.
So, I mean, we have to think about what we have, what is good in the long run, what is there good for the people, and not for what is good for the corporates. So, the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, it was constituted in 2007. And then it was reconstituted, like everything would be reconstituted, in 2014. The Prime Minister held its first meeting of the Council in January 19, 2015. I would like to ask the Minister if the Council ever met after that. Because I've looked through the media and other reports, and there's no information of the Council meeting ever again. So if the Council did not meet after that, the Prime Minister went to the Glasgow summit on climate change. And he has made promises, he's delivered a speech, and he said what the stand of the country is going to be, and the minister was also there. I'd like to know, without consulting this council, why did you have this wide council? You did not consult any of the states, you did not consult any of the chief ministers. Because whatever promise you make, the state governments which have to implement it.
Correct.
Without the state governments, nothing can move.
Correct.
This is a federal nation.
Cooperative federalism.
And it's a union of states. I hope the government remembers that, and it has to consult with the states.
Correct.
It has to include the states, because we are the worst affected. You don't even, when there's a flood and when farmers are affected, when people are affected, and we ask the central government for funds, if we ask for 4,000 crores, not even 150 crores come.
Correct.
So you either help us this way, nor do you consult us. So I think it is very important to consult us.
Correct.
And moreover, I'd like to ask that the progress achieved by the National Action Plan on Climate Change, it was recently constituted. I'd like to know what they have done. And the Apex Committee for Implementation of the Paris Agreement is also not available about and what they have done, what they've achieved. I think it should be made available to the public so that they can understand what you have been doing and what you've been working. And the Atmanirbhar, it's very difficult.
Atmanirbhar. Atmanirbhar.
Pardon? See, that is the problem. You see, you don't understand that we speak different languages. Either it can be in English or you can have it in regional languages so all of us can say it. சரி இனிமேல தமிழ்லே பேசுறேன் புரியுதான்னு சொல்லுங்க. அதுக்கு பர்மிஷன் கேட்கணும்ங்கறீங்களே. அதுதானே பிரச்சனை. The stimulus package not only has no place for environmental safeguards, but it is actually ecologically very regressive. One would have thought that the increasing scientific evidence linking economic problems and livelihood and disease outbreaks to ecological devastation would prompt a government that proclaims itself to be sustainable to put in place measures for conservation of natural ecosystems and wildlife. This is totally missing from your vision.
What a shame.
We say make in India. I'd rather say Tarcharbudaya India. But we are waiting for technologies in tackling climate change problems from developed nations. There's a lot of discussions about carbon capture, utilization, storage, hydrogen cells. I would like to know the stand on the government, what you think about this. Do you think it is efficient? Do you think we can also include that? We can think about it. Nobody knows what the government thinks about it, whether it can be taken seriously or we are not going to include that in our climate policy. And it is very prohibitively expensive. You wouldn't put something to stop emissions, sulfur oxide emissions in the coal factories. So this is very prohibitive. So why can't make in India think about technologies which will reduce and which will protect our people? So India has not invested in policies to facilitate our net zero commitments to COP26. It has also not made the budgetary allocations necessary to execute on our promise to the net zero 2070. The union government has actually reduced the budgetary allocation to the environment ministry. The minister, I'm sure, is well aware of it, and he knows, he must have felt the pinch. It's been reduced by 230 crores this year compared to the previous year. Our environment minister in Glasgow summit has said that climate finance is not charity. This is an obligation, responsibility, duty, and above. I hope he reminds the government and the finance ministry about this, that it is not charity, and this is a very, very important department, and they have to allocate enough funds to protect our people and the country. The economic development and environmental conservation does not have to be on opposite sides. There are many models in front of us which can ensure both development and conservation, but we have to listen. And we should believe in consultation. We should consult with experts, scientists, people who've been working in the grassroots level. And I think climate literacy is very important, not just students. I think for politicians, for public representatives, for officers, whoever is involved in policy making and will be policy makers of the future have to have climate literacy and understand that it is very important to protect this world. And the government needs to formulate a policy on climate change mitigation and adaptation with adequate investments on research and development. It is imperative that the central government holds consultations with all state governments, environmentalists, activists, and people who've been working towards combating climate change. I would like to conclude by quoting Jay Inslee, the 23rd governor of Washington. We are the first generation to feel the sting of climate change, and we are the last generation that can do something about it.
Absolutely.
So let us do something about it together. I mean, we are not here to say you are in the treasury, we are in the opposition, and nobody can be above blame. We accept that. So I think we have to come together to protect and to do something about climate change and that is the only true gift we can give the next generation. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you very much.